Those that did speak out would be re-victimized and silenced, and priests would continue having access to those children to abuse them. So I want to thank the AG, but today this is about justice, hope, and healing. Scott has come forward today, as I spoke about earlier, to make sure this never happens again, because we all know that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And our hope today is twofold: to help Scott and others heal from this, but more importantly, or equally important, to make sure that no other children suffer this kind of abuse at the hands of priests. And I want those other victims to hear us today, so they know that they're not alone, that this is not their fault, and that there is hope. In this case, we have filed a lawsuit against Father Evans in the Archdiocese of Denver and the Fort Collins Church where Scott was abused. And this never had to happen. As laid out in detail in the complaint, this priest never should have been ordained. In his very first year in seminary, he was sent home because he was moving in too fast on other men and too forcefully. When he was allowed to return to the seminary, there were 2 allegations of sexual and physical harassment, with one seminarian going so far as to write a letter saying that this priest should not be ordained because he will use the priesthood to manipulate others and inflict damage. These allegations were never investigated by the Catholic Church, and they ordained him as a priest. And then at his very first parish, there were 2 reports of sexual and physical harassment, including one from a mother who said that this Father Evans, this priest, was too intense with her child when he visited her child in the hospital too many times. That also went uninvestigated by the Catholic Church, and said they moved him to a second parish. And in a second parish, he exhibited behavior which would later be described by a priest psychologist as having boundary issues, including one incident where Father Evans put his arm inappropriately around the neck of a young child. And so he was transferred again to another parish, as the Catholic priest often does, to where Scott met him. And Scott was only, if you see in these photos on the sides, take a look at Scott. He was only 14 years old when he met Father Evans. He never stood a chance. Father Evans sexually and physically abused Scott over 100 times. Scott was there for 3 years suffering this abuse. And when Father Evans was finally turned in, victims from all 3 parishes came forward, alleging eerily similar abuse at the hands of Father Evans, where they were told by the priest to lay down, to disrobe, where he then proceeded to molest them and to tell them that this is what the church teaches. And so Scott suffered through this abuse for 3 years. And for 20 years, he has held his silence in shame and in despair. These incidents, these memories have haunted him and have taken his chance at a normal life as an adult from him. And for 20 years, he's lived with this, feeling alone, feeling shameful, and in an effort to numb the kind of pain that is accompanied by this kind of suffering, he turned to drugs and alcohol, like many survivors do. But we are proud to say he has gotten through that. And in the past few years, he has gotten clean, and he has found his courage to come forward and speak to all of you. He was raised in a Catholic family. He was taught to listen to priestly authority. And over the last 20 years, he has come out of it. And he's here to share his story today, to inspire hope amongst other survivors, to let them know that they are not alone and that it is not their fault. So I'd like to invite Scott up to say a few words now.
Thanks, Kurt. I'd like to thank all of you for coming out today and to take the time to cover my case against the Archdiocese of Denver. I'm coming forward to share my story of physical and sexual abuse at the hands of a priest when I was a child. The abuse lasted for over 3 years, and there was over 100 different times that this man physically and sexually assaulted me. The abuse I endured has had a profound and lasting impact on my life, and it has taken me a long time to come to terms with what happened. Last year, I saw on the news that my abuser had been released from prison more than 5 years early from a conviction of sexual abuse that occurred over the same period. Thanks to new legislature passed in Colorado, I learned that I could come forward and hold not only my abuser accountable, but also the Archdiocese of Denver responsible for their role in knowingly transferring this man who already had a record of sexual harassment and reports of inappropriate relationships with minors at the time they moved him to my church. My hope is that by coming forward and speaking here today, it will encourage parents to talk to their kids about this very sad but very real danger that people in a position of power present to their children. I want to make it clear that this kind of abuse is never the fault of the victim and that it is never acceptable. I hope that by sharing my story, I can encourage others who have been through similar experiences to come forward and seek help and the support they need. To Archbishop Aquila, my hope is that you are taking this more seriously than your predecessors, and that you are doing all you can to protect the children at your parishes. Please don't allow another generation of children to experience the kind of abuse myself and countless other victims did. I'd like to express my gratitude for the support and care that I received from my fiance and my lawyers, Mara, Kurt, Leander, who helped me through this difficult journey. I'll continue to seek healing and justice, and I hope that my story will help to raise awareness about this issue and encourage others to speak out.
Scott's happy to take some questions from all of you. Want to come up, Mark? Yeah.
Scott, did you ever think about reporting this to the church back when it was happening, or in the years since? Can you talk about
Sure.
what your thoughts are on that, what you did, what you didn't do, and
Yeah.
why?
So I was actually called in during the investigation that he actually got convicted for as a witness. And at the time, that was my first realization of the abuse that had happened. And I just wasn't prepared at all at that time in my life. I was still really young, and I just had no idea really how profound of an impact that trauma had on me. So like I said, luckily with this new look-back window that was passed in the Colorado legislature, it allows me to kind of right this regret that I've always had of not coming forward. So it's been really cathartic to be able to go through this experience.
And did you make any sort of report during the Attorney General's investigation? I don't know if you ever saw their call for people to come forward and report.
I didn't, the first time I knew about that report was going through this experience with my lawyers.
Other questions?
It's, any evidence to talk about, I mean, when you go to court for a trial, do you bring any evidence other than recollections?
Basically, my story is very similar to the assaults that he was convicted for. It's a very similar story that I had that the other victims had as well. So that's the most outstanding evidence.
Yeah.
To the people who might have overlooked what happened to you, to the public who doesn't know what happened to you, what would you want to explain to them? What would you want to tell them why this is so important?
I'd like to tell them that I really hope that the Catholic Church is taking this more seriously. It doesn't seem like, even after everything's come out over the last 20 years or so, that really there's been a change in the environment in Catholic churches. Like I said, I hope that Archbishop Aquila is taking this opportunity to do something different than the past archbishops. Because like we said in the report, the archbishops knew of these kind of abuses that these priests were perpetrating and just allowed to move them to church. And so I really hope that the church sees this as an opportunity to take it, like to make some real change, but also as an opportunity for parents to talk to their kids. Because I never had that conversation. And as odd as it might sound, I didn't know that I needed to come to my parents if adults were telling me to keep secrets or if adults were scaring me,
Go ahead.
Your attorney talked about the way this has manifested itself in your life over the years. Could you talk a little bit about that? It sounded like drugs and alcohol maybe?
Yeah, so I mean, right away as a kid, I was diagnosed with chronic insomnia right away. I actually started wetting the bed again as a teenager because of the night terrors. So right away, the physical manifestations were significant. And then as I grew older, I turned to drugs and alcohol because that was the only way to numb